Hello, and welcome back to a video on the channel formerly and currently known as Generic Brick Pun. Today I'm going to be talking about 3 LEGO Batmobiles that have all been out on the market at the same time, at least as far as I can tell, and should all be readily available for any person interested in purchasing one now. This isn't exactly going to be a buyer's guide because these are all entirely different vehicles, set at somewhat different price points. Your interest in any one of these is going to vary based on your interest in the respective films and television series that these characters appear in. I'm more interested in evaluating, 1, the quality of each of these sets, and 2, the very scientific measurement of how much joy they bring me. The good news is these sets are all fairly easily comparable in their general philosophy, as each of them comes with 1 Batman figure and 1 villain, which incidentally happens to be different for each set, which, I don't know, in my opinion, gives us a little bit of something to dig into. Let's talk about the most recent LEGO Batmobile, which, at least where I'm from, was the Robert Pattinson The Batman Batmobile, which, as you can see, has a very different design philosophy from a lot of previous Batmobiles. It's, in my opinion, probably the most grounded design for at least any of the live-action Batmobiles that I've seen, although admittedly I've literally never seen a single film in the DC Expanded Universe, so if there's one of those that looks really fantastic, I apologize. I'm trying to keep the glare off of it, but I would argue that out of all of these, this is one that you could conceivably see driving around on the street at any given point in time and not be entirely shocked. In terms of its comparison to the design of the real-world vehicle, it's fairly close, although the rear side of the vehicle is where it starts to fall off. This definitely doesn't feel quite as raised and suspended like the actual in-universe Batmobile. But ultimately, I was pretty happy with this design when it came out. I really liked the film that it was based on, and I liked the characters involved with this set, as well as the car chase scene that this appeared in. Recently, when I went to rewatch The Batman, I knew that I was going to fall asleep halfway through, and I made sure to stay awake during the Batmobile chase scene, specifically because I loved seeing this vehicle in action. As you can see, it's got 2 spring-loaded shooters, which are actuated using these 2 pieces right here. They're a little bit weird looking when the shooters are out, so I always leave them in for just kind of like display purposes. You can add extra blue flame elements like these in order to increase the coolness factor, but personally I prefer displaying it this way. Ultimately, I would consider this a very respectable model, but probably the weakest out of any in this lineup. Next, let's talk about the Balemobile, or the Tumbler, as some people seem to like to call it. Personally, I think that this is probably one of the most difficult designs to capture in such a small-scale LEGO form. They've built 2 large UCS models of this vehicle, and both of them looked fantastic, but they were gigantic, and so it was a lot easier to capture some of the weird and kind of confusing shapes that this vehicle has. So I think that this thing did a pretty excellent job at what it was trying to do. And oh boy, the glare is less. It looks fairly close, if not as close as you could possibly expect from a LEGO consumer product to the in-universe vehicle. Sold for about $40 in the US, although you could easily find it on sale. I believe this sold for $30, forgot to mention that, but it doesn't really matter all that much. And honestly, in terms of satisfaction, this definitely beats out the other 2 models on this, just because it goes together very interestingly. It doesn't really look like what it's going to be until you're done, and so it's satisfying to see it all come together and realize that this thing you've been putting together that definitely does not seem like it's going to look good at all, comes together to form a pretty decent and like cohesive model. It's got these 2 stud shooters here. It opens up to allow you to place the figure inside, which I would argue is one of the weakest points of this set, as it is very difficult to actually get Christian Bale in there. Enough to the point where I just don't even put him in. I don't want to like get his cape caught on something. Easily probably the weakest aspect of this model. You've got a little Batarang clipped in right there, and otherwise there's an extra seat, not for Robin though. No Robin is included in this because there was no Robin included in the trilogy. Poor Dick Grayson, I guess. And finally, the third vehicle I would like to discuss is the Adam West Batmobile from the 1966 television series, which, oh boy, oh, that's unfortunate. Okay, well, careful about that there. This is what it should look like on the bottom. This design is fairly similar to the original Lego design for this vehicle, which came in the Batcave set, although I was a young person at the time and definitely could not afford such a large and overpriced set. So this is what I got, and I would argue it's ultimately better than the original design, and it looks pretty close to the actual in-universe model. While I would argue that this is a better approximation for what it is, I do think it looks less like the in-universe Batmobile than the Robert Pattinson Batmobile does, just because there are so many like small curves and shapes that it's really difficult to approximate. Like these fins here should definitely be thinner if we're going for perfect accuracy. Personally, I feel like that probably could have been done, but I can't say exactly how. So I'm ultimately fine with what they did here. It's got a little opening trunk in here, some batarangs. It's got the little parachutes on the back. They don't do anything, but they're kind of cute. And of course, it comes with our Adam West Batman here, looking pretty fantastic. But when we get to the figures, I'll discuss him more. This set sold for $30. I believe it currently sells for $30, and I'm quite impressed with it. It has these two stud shooters on the front, which can be replaced if you want with these pieces, if you don't like the look of stud shooters. I personally don't mind them. I think they look fine. Maybe it's just because I don't know, I kind of grew up a little bit nostalgic for them. But yeah, I don't see any serious problem with the way that this set is designed, and so I'm perfectly happy with it. The set, unlike the others, includes this little rotating display stand with some information on it. Let's see, I think that's in focus. Either way, pretty easy to figure out what's said on this. I think this is a pretty cute addition. Definitely didn't need to be done, but I do think it works pretty well for what's basically, I mean, it's a collector set, right? Not a whole lot of kids are super into the 60s Batman series. I watched it a bit growing up, but I only really ever watched it when someone in my family was watching it, or when it was available on. So I have nostalgia for it, but probably not to the degree of, some adults who grew up with it nonstop, because that was kind of the peak of superhero comedy at the time. Now is probably a good time to talk about the figures. As you can see, we've got our Robert Pattinson Batman here for his Robert Pattinson Batmobile. Why did I phrase it that way? Oh my gosh. We've got our Christian Bale Batman, and we've got our Adam West Batman. Each of these has a clearly different design philosophy behind them, so it's a little bit difficult to compare them directly to each other. They're completely different characters from completely different series with completely different tones. But I do think it's worth discussing how each of these characters kind of fits in together. Personally, I think, again, the weakest one is Robert Pattinson's Batman. I like the costume design in universe, but this features too much gray. There's printing on the front of the legs and then none on the sides, where I think this probably could have just been dual molded to avoid this problem, which just makes kind of an awkward look that was more forgivable back in, the early 2010s, but becomes a little bit more awkward and frustrating now, even though we seem to be seeing that more and more, for instance, on our little Adam West Batman there. But it's a little bit less frustrating, personally, for this one. The Christian Bale one is kind of a dumbed-down, more simplistic version of the actual Christian Bale costume that you get in more expensive sets. I think it's pretty nice. You're able to replace the head with a scarecrow fear monster. I've literally never done that, to the point where I have no clue where I even put the head. And then our Adam West Batman, which I would argue is very similar to its Batmobile. Not as good of approximation as it could be, but still I think pretty good for what it is. So as you can see, this uses a slightly different cowl from the other two Batman figures, where the other two have these chin strap pieces. The Adam West one does not. This is just kind of the other cowl piece. Some would argue that this piece should have also been used on the Robert Pattinson Batman, and I am inclined to agree. But looking underneath, you can see, hopefully you can see that the printing on this figure is kind of disappointing. The white of his flesh is just too pale and white, and kind of makes him look like almost dead compared to the other characters. If you look on the backs, you can see what the back of their faces are. Both Robert Pattinson and Christian Bale use the same face. Bit disappointing, but not really the end of the world in my opinion. The simplicity on the design here I think is really fantastic. This just really, for me, kind of exudes the vibes of the design of the 60s character. So that makes me quite happy, and I'm really glad to see it represented here. And I'm glad that it's in an affordable set for anybody who wants to get a hold of this character, but doesn't have the money to fork over for the super expensive special edition set, especially now, given that it's been retired for some time. All right, and now we have our villains. On the left here, we've got Cesar Romero's Joker. On the far right here, we have Colin Farrell's Penguin. And in the middle, we have Inception guy's Scarecrow. I think he's the guy from Inception. I cannot remember his name, which is frustrating because he's in a lot of good stuff. But anyway, as you can see, again, very different design philosophy for each of these. I'd argue these are probably the two most similar, but Cesar Romero's Joker definitely stands out as a completely different character design. Personally, I'm not as upset by the fact that his printing doesn't continue on the side for this character. I don't think it's as much of a problem as either of the two Batmans that have that issue. And I really, really like the design of this character's face. I don't know if I can get it in focus well enough, which is frustrating. But he actually has kind of the printing for his mustache because Cesar Romero refused to, at least as far as I'm aware, refused to shave his mustache. They just painted over it with white paint for the series. And so it's very nice to see that kind of represented here, because you could have easily ignored that for a character like this, but they didn't. And that's what makes them special. Scarecrow is a fairly generic one. Personally, I feel like he would have been better served by actually having a cowl piece and not just having his head with the bag over it. And he's got just a generic stud shooter, which is, in my opinion, I don't know if that stud actually came there. I might have just stuck that on. I don't know. It's just basic. It's not super exciting compared to like Joker's little whimsical grappling gun that is just a tad more exciting. And then we've got our Colin Farrell Penguin, who was a shockingly good portrayal of the character in the film that he was in. Almost unrecognizable. I know that's what everyone's been saying. Got a nice little like rocket launcher type thing here with the new style stud shooter. Nothing super exciting, but totally adequate, totally fine. And then this gun piece that is definitely not a real gun. Definitely not a real world weapon. Don't worry, Lego. I will keep your secret. I think that they're all pretty dang good. I think that no matter which of these that you went with, if you were to purchase one, you would be fairly satisfied with the figure selection. I do wish that the 60s set in particular came with Robin. In fact, I probably would have even been willing to lose the Joker for Robin, which is weird since the Joker is, out of all of these, definitely my favorite of the characters. You can thank HBO's Harley Quinn for that. But even so, the figure selection was perfectly acceptable and didn't have any serious problems. I will also mention that Robert Pattinson does come with an alternate head and hair piece so that you can remove it and see his actual face. I don't recognize this face from anywhere. I imagine that this is a reuse. I think it fits his character perfectly fine. And then if you look on the back, that's what it looks like. It's not fantastic. It's not a perfect representation of the character by any means, but I do think it's kind of nice, and it's always good to have these. Like, never stop adding extra head hair combos for characters with helmets. I mean, even if they're bad, you just like you're getting a decent like wig piece for another figure, and you can't put a price on that. I mean, you can, but I'm not putting a price on it right now. But yeah, ultimately, hopefully this kind of group review of a bunch of different Batmobiles was interesting to you, at least. I just thought it would be fun to kind of get out of the way just a bunch of fairly similar sets with a fairly similar philosophy. And hopefully, if you're a fan of Batman, this will give you some idea of what to expect with each of these. Like I said, I don't expect it to actually alter your decision much, because it probably depends on which thing you're a fan of. But at least now, if you were to purchase the set, you have some clue of what it's going to be like once it's all finished. But with that, do the liking and subscribing thing if you found this interesting. I always love to hear any sort of like critique or comment that you might have, because I could definitely find millions of different ways to improve, and I would like to continue to do that. But with that, I will hopefully see you in the next one.